Hello and welcome to episode 2 of my video newsletter, The Weekly Wash. Now, ironically, episode 1 was actually 3 weeks ago, which is a little bit too long for a weekly video newsletter. But if I'm being completely honest, everything that has been going on in the world with the coronavirus, which I've mostly become used to now, but all the other stuff with George Floyd and the protests and the response to the protests from both sides of the political spectrum, it's brought me to a bit of a halt. So that's why there's been such a gap in between the two videos, because I needed to take some time to go away and think about what I thought around all of these topics and how I can change myself so that I'm more sensitive to certain issues. But I won't talk about that here because that's not what this is about. I would probably talk about that a little bit more in depth another time. In this video, I've got 3 more high quality recommendations for you. The first recommendation is a book, the second is a mental model from that book, and then the third recommendation is of a documentary that I watched, which was just fantastic. So let's start with the book, which is The Great Mental Models by Farnam Street. I talked a bit about mental models in the first episode of The Weekly Wash when I was talking about the Modern Wisdom podcast, and specifically an episode with George Mack. In this episode, Chris Williamson and George Mack spent the whole episode just running through mental models that they both liked and talking about how you can apply to them. So mental models are really popular right now, and if you want to learn more about them, then there's no better place to start than with Farnam Street and with their website fs.blog. Farnam Street is effectively an organisation whose goal is centred around helping people to improve how they think. And as I say, their website is just a perfect resource for learning about mental models. To add to this, Farnam Street are now weaving all of that collected information about mental models into a book series called The Great Mental Models. And I spent it would have been the last week if I released this after the first video, but I spent a week in the past pouring through the first book of the series, which I think is just called The Great Mental Models General Thinking Concepts, but I'll double check that and put it in the description. The best stamp of approval that I can give to Farnam Street and sort of de facto the book is that when I discovered their website initially, it was like one of those eureka moments for me where this whole world of knowledge unfurled before me, and I spent days and days and days just pouring through their website. And the book is more of that good stuff. Great Mental Models is a curation of concepts to consider and biases to avoid to help us to live life just a bit more intelligently. And adopting and using these mental models can play a big part in just improving our lives on the whole. They help in decision making, planning, analysis, avoiding mistakes, and just loads more. With my appreciation of the Great Mental Models in Farnam Street already established, the second drop of value that I want to give you today is a mental model from within the book, which is titled as The Map is Not the Territory. The meaning of this, in one line given by Farnam Street, is that the map of reality is not reality. It's pretty simple. In their words, we use maps every day. They help us navigate from one city to another. They help us reduce complexity to simplicity. But maps are just that, maps. They're abstractions of reality that we create to help guide us. And the problems arise when we forget that they're just representations and not reality itself. I mean, even the constantly updated, hyper-detailed Google Maps can't tell if there's a pothole on the road, or if a car will crash in front of me, or I don't know, if a road might be prone to flooding. So, with the issue uncovered, the question then is, how do we combat this problem? Well, first of all, it's good to just be aware of this dissonance between map and territory. From there, we can look to build slack into our plans and expectations. Now, there's irony, of course, in the fact that even in the application of mental models themselves, we have to be wary of this as a potential stumbling block. For example, we could go into a situation knowing that a particular mental model may be useful to us, but then realizing once we get into that situation that that mental model is completely defunct based on some extraneous variable that we didn't predict. An example given in the Great Mental Models is stereotyping. Now, stereotyping someone based upon the job sector that they belong to might help to give us a little bit of prior insight as to what that person might be like. But just because someone belongs to a category never means that that category completely defines them. An example from my own life is that for some reason I sometimes get weirdly shy about going to public places, like the beach. My head runs through all of these irrational anxieties and fears about what might happen. But when I actually force myself to go to the beach, I have an absolute blast. I swim in the sea, it's brilliant. I sunbathe for a bit, read a book, no one bothers me. At this point, I should then really update my map so it sort of is more closely aligned with reality. Unfortunately for me, this is a really old, ingrained map, probably some deep problem from childhood or something. So it resists updates. Well, what can I do with that in mind? I guess the best thing that I can do, if you have anything like that yourselves, the best thing that you can do is just make sure that you're aware of this dissonance, like I said, between map and reality. And then you can at least tell yourself that, yes, you have these fears and anxieties, but there's a good chance they may be unfounded. In the book, Farnam Street offer 3 ways to try and keep our maps as accurate as possible, though they will never be perfectly accurate. I'm not going to go into them here, but if you want to sort of learn of them, then grab the book. It's brilliant. It might even be on the website because they're very generous like that, Farnam Street. The Great Mental Models is full of mental models like these. I mean, that might not even be the best one. It's just the very beginning one. And it's a good example of a mental model to, I guess, help contextualize for people what a mental model is and what it does. Really, they just help you to optimize your thinking. If you want to grab the book, like I said, just go to Amazon. I mean, it's probably not very ethical to always suggest Amazon, but if not, look elsewhere. But because this is a smaller institution that have made this book, and because of coronavirus creating difficulties for printing books, you might struggle to find the hardback, whereas it's easy to grab the Kindle edition off Amazon. So there we go. Finally, the third recommendation that I'm going to give you today is for a documentary called Fantastic Fungi. Something happens when I start thinking about fungi. I just become joyously and ridiculously overwhelmed. There's this whole world of mind-blowing information out there. So much so that when I want to share this information with others, I just don't know where to start. Added to that is the fact that it's hard to talk about your passion for mushrooms and fungal matter without coming off as a little bit weird. When I started watching the documentary, I had my notebook out and I was making notes, but I very quickly gave up because to try and convey this level of information about something that many people don't know much about, it would just be a bit of a pathetic imitation of what you will get from watching the documentary yourself. And if you don't know much about mushrooms at all, maybe the extent of your knowledge is of button mushrooms and chestnut mushrooms and whatever other mushrooms that people generally eat. And I guess, you know, the mushrooms from Alice in Wonderland, Amanita muscaria, I think they are. I promise you, this documentary, it'll blow you away. It explains everything so clearly, and it's accompanied by these magnificent fungal time lapses that just I was in awe of. My general ignorance to the role that the fungal kingdom plays in nature, but also in our lives, is pretty flabbergasting and also a little bit infuriating for me. But equally as important is the role that I think it's going to play in our lives going forward, now that the shackles of the war on drugs have faded to black. Consider the fact that trees care for each other, sharing nutrients underground via a network of fungal fibres called mycelium. Consider the fact that under every footstep that you take on the ground is almost 300 miles of mycelium, connecting entire forests to each other. Or consider the reality that oyster mushrooms, which yes, sometimes we do eat, me probably more than you, have been shown to be able to break down some of our most damaging pollutants like carbon and oil, and even cigarette butts. I personally think that over the next 50 years we're going to develop a much greater understanding of the fungal kingdom and the miraculous acts that it performs underneath our feet. And as well as this, I should say that fungi, specific types of fungi, have played a huge role in my development as a person. But we'll talk about that another time because that's a completely different topic that I could just go on about forever. But we'll save it. You can watch this documentary by going to fantasticfungi.com, and you have to pay for it. You pay £3 or something to rent it, but I promise you it's worth way more than that, way in excess of that. So just go do it if you want to find out about something that you've had no idea about before. Like, it's fascinating. It really is. Right, that's it for this week. I'm going to do my best to be back for next week. In fact, I guarantee I will be. That's very daring of me. Even if the ending of the world moves into its next stage. I mean, surely climate change is going to have its say at some point. We'll leave it there though. Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the second episode of the Weekly Wash. If you liked the video, then click like on YouTube or on whatever social media I've shared this on and you've found it. Other than that, click subscribe again on YouTube. That would be great for me. Follow me, whatever, man. Just stay safe. Enjoy yourselves in general in life. Wow, what a fantastic piece of advice that is. Yeah, look after yourselves and your families. For now, it's bye, and I'll see you next week. Take care.